Okay, grab your scrubs, because today we're entering the literary morgue to perform a full-blown autopsy on the tragic collapse of Shakespeare's Othello. Now, picture this for a second. You break your arm. The diagnosis is beautifully simple, right? You pull up an x-ray, point to the jagged white line, and boom, everyone in the room agrees on the cause of the pain. It was an external force that met a bone and, well, the bone lost. But when you're looking at an autopsy of a literary disaster, specifically the total psychological collapse of a tragic hero, that x-ray machine suddenly becomes utterly useless.
So what actually killed him? Did Othello die from a lethal injection of external poison, or was it an internal autoimmune disease? To find the true cause of death, we are going to act as forensic investigators today. We're going to examine the feuding theories of two brilliant but violently opposed critical coroners. Seriously, imagine these two medical examiners standing over the exact same body, practically in a fistfight over the cause of death. One looks at the scans and insists a toxic agent infiltrated the system from the outside. The other looks at the exact same scans and argues, no way, the bone density was already ruined. The man's own system attacked itself, and the poison just sped up the inevitable.
What's really fascinating here is the massive historical gulf between our two experts. On one side, we have A.C. Bradley, writing back in 1904, right at the height of the British Empire. He believes in this pure, innate nobility that gets violently violated by a chaotic outside force. He needs his hero to be pure. But then, fast forward to F.R. Leavis in 1937. We're talking post-World War I, post-Freud, right as fascism is rising in Europe. Leavis completely abandons the illusion of the infallible general. Instead, he diagnoses a terrifying, fragile vanity that actively invites its own destruction.
To figure out which coroner is actually right about the cause of death, we need to pull our first tissue sample. We have to look at the baseline health of our victim before the poison was ever introduced. So, while Bradley insists Othello's baseline was pure trust, romanticism, and this almost flawless goodness, Leavis disagrees completely. He diagnoses a massive theatrical ego, and he coins this brilliantly cutting phrase, approving self-traumatization. Leavis argues that Othello, who's this middle-aged soldier who spent his entire life in war camps, isn't actually deeply in love with his new young Venetian wife Desdemona as a real, distinct human being. Instead, he's fundamentally in love with a glamorous picture of himself being loved by her. It's like he's constantly performing his own greatness for an audience. And this perfectly illustrates the divide when they examine the exact same tissue sample. Take the famous moment in Act 1 where Othello is confronted by an armed, angry mob in the street. Instead of drawing his weapon, he delivers this magnificently calm line about keeping up their bright swords before the dew rusts them. Now Bradley hears transcendent, stoic restraint. He sees a man totally aware of his own hard-won dignity. But Leavis spots a fragile narcissist admiring his own performance in real time. He argues Othello knows exactly how good he sounds. He's his own audience, playing the character of Othello, the great warrior. Now, if Bradley's theory that Othello was perfectly healthy and pure is true, he runs into a major problem. He has to shift the entire weight of the tragedy onto the antagonist. The external poison has to be magically potent. So let's pull our second tissue sample and put Iago on the autopsy table. For Bradley's x-ray to make any sense at all, Iago can't just be a disgruntled guy or a jealous employee. He has to be a spiritually dead, towering figure of pure intellect and evil, literally worse than Satan himself. Bradley argues that unlike Milton's Satan, who still had traces of angelic pathos and could actually feel a sense of loss, Iago has this terrifying deadness of human feeling, combined with a supreme, almost godlike intellect. But hold on. If you actually sit down and map out Iago's claims, his motives are a contradictory, shifting mess. In one breath, he hates Othello over a lost promotion, and the next, it's because he thinks Othello slept with his wife. Then he claims he loves Desdemona himself. Then he suspects Cassio. He is literally just throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. To explain away all those messy, shifting motives, Bradley leans on this brilliant psychological concept, the motive hunting of motiveless malignity. He argues that Iago's true motivation is just a thwarted sense of superiority. He's just annoyed by goodness. Basically, he's a cosmic mastermind drafting the ruin of his betters simply for the feverish thrill of artistic creation. He wants to play the devil just to prove he can, fishing around for an excuse for the malice that was already burning inside him. But Leavis literally rolls his eyes at this whole demigod theory. Think about it. If Othello is purely noble, he can only be tricked by an evil genius, right? But Iago's plot relies entirely on insane, ridiculous luck. If Amelia hadn't just happened to walk by and pick up a randomly dropped handkerchief, or if Cassio hadn't laughed at the exact wrong microsecond during an eavesdropped conversation, the entire plot falls apart. Iago's grand so-called masterclass of manipulation is mostly just him standing around, crossing his fingers and hoping for a series of highly convenient coincidences.
So, the absolute crucial point for Leavis is this. Iago is not some supreme intellect. He's merely an ancillary dramatic mechanism. He just speeds up a tragedy that was already hardwired into Othello's character. Iago just happens to be the guy tapping on a foundation that is already deeply fundamentally cracked. The essential traitor is already inside the gates of Othello's mind.
To really prove this internal rot, we have to run a toxicology report on the absolute centerpiece of the play, Act 3, Scene 3. This is where the divergence between our two corners becomes a massive, undeniable chasm.
Let's trace how incredibly fast this builds. In line 0, Othello is declaring absolute, definitive love for his wife. Barely 70 lines later, Iago drops a few incredibly vague, shadowy hints. And by line 90, literally just a few minutes of stage time, Othello has completely collapsed and is questioning his entire marriage. We have to ask, how does a rock of pure trust crumble into sand so quickly?
Well, Broadly defends this breathtaking whiplash as cultural confusion. He diagnoses outsider syndrome, arguing Othello is a foreigner who just doesn't understand complex Venetian society and has to trust Iago as a cultural guide. But Leavis points out the agonizing truth. Othello's fragile ego makes him perfectly primed for this. He doesn't truly know his wife, so he incredibly easily accepts her as a generic, deceptive Venetian trope. Honestly, it's cowardice. It is simply easier for his ego to believe she is inherently deceptive than to actually face his own deep-seated fears of inadequacy. Even when the jealousy fully roots itself and Othello swores blood vengeance, the two coroners disagree completely on the symptoms. Is this a great man locking himself into a terrible but monumental course of action to protect the moral order of the universe? Or, as Leavis points out, when Othello goes from crying the pity of it to snarling, "I will chop her into messes," just 3 lines later, is it just ferocious possessiveness? Leavis sees a stupid egotist using heroic, beautiful verse as a psychological shield to disguise his own ugly, vindictive rage. Which brings us to the final verdict. This entire debate reaches its absolute boiling point in the climax of the play, the bedroom scene in Act 5. Othello murders Desdemona, and then the illusion is violently shattered when the truth comes out. Reality finally breaks through the self-deception. Looking at the aftermath, Bradley sees a redeeming, boundless cosmic sorrow in Othello's agony. He argues Othello achieves true catharsis, learns through ultimate suffering, and takes full moral responsibility. But Leavis delivers a completely devastating counter-argument. Yes, Othello realizes the handkerchief was a lie. He discovers his factual mistake. But he never ever realizes that his own vanity, his possessiveness, and his total failure to truly know his wife were the real weapons that killed her. He remains completely blind to his internal flaw. I mean, just look at this jaw-dropping narcissism in his final moments. With his innocent wife lying murdered by his own hands right in front of him, and the authorities preparing to arrest him, what is his very first instinct? He tells them to stop, reminds them of his resume, and essentially directs his own heroic death scene. He turns himself into the heroic defender of the state and the punished victim all in one grand theatrical gesture. He is quite literally PR spinning his own downfall, making sure his brand survives his death. Now, this whole academic war is actually a brilliant mirror held up to us today. Think about it. Why do we so badly crave Bradley's theory? Because we desperately want to believe in the demonic Iago. It acts as a psychological defense mechanism. If a supervillain ruined everything, then our own nobility is safely preserved. It's the ultimate shifting of blame. But Leavis strips away that comfort blanket. He demands we look at the ugly truth, that our vanity, our desperate need to be the pristine heroes of our own stories, is exactly what makes us capable of destroying them. So I'm going to leave you with this provocative thought to take away from this explainer. The next time you face a crisis, the next time a relationship crumbles or your big plans shatter, and you desperately want to draft that perfectly filtered, self-justifying social media post where you play the noble victim, ask yourself a really hard question. Which coroner is right about your underlying X-ray? Are you just looking around for an Iago to blame? Or do you have the courage to look past your own self-dramatization and admit that the essential traitor was already inside the gates?